Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Smex and I make videos here on my YouTube channel for competitive players and competitive teams in League of Legends tournaments and amateur tournament scenes for them people who are trying to break into that. If you missed my last video, I do have another one on the channel. This is my second video, but I will link a playlist with both of these videos in the description, and I'm going to put all the other videos of this topic and other topics like it in that playlist as well. If you would like to check that out here, I will link that in the description. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the topic of this video here, which is drafting with Kai'Sa as a competitive team. And the reason I wanted to dive in specifically with Kai'Sa as a champion is because I know that there are a lot of people out there in the competitive scene who just blind pick Kai'Sa all the time. They're Kai'Sa one tricks. It's their best champion. They want to find a place to put that in the draft, and they always do first pick it. And unlike the previous seasons that she's been a champion in the game, that's just not really how you can draft with her anymore. She's not the same power pick that she once was. She is more of a counter pick now and more of a niche pick in the bot lane as it stands in the meta currently as this video is being released here. She is she's just not on the same power level as she once was. Her damage is lower, her safety is lower, and a bunch of different things culminate into how the champion is viewed today, along with other champions being released into the role. I'm talking about Senna and Aphelios in particular. She is not blind pickable anymore. And this video today is dedicated to the people who still draft with her thinking that she is. But yeah, let's hop right into it. Of course, Kai'Sa does still have some strength as a champion. Most of them are still the same, just to a lesser degree. Her biggest focus in the game right now is that she is very good at backline diving. She is this assassin type champion in the bot lane role, which is really cool and it's really fun to play around, which I imagine is why she is so popular still, even though she's not as strong as she once was. She is just a very fun champion. And this is why she is kind of an assassin as it stands with her Killer Instinct ultimate here and the supercharged stealth as well, just making so she can have a lot of outplay potential in her kit. But she also does have mid to late game damage. She does spike in that area of the map or of the game. Of course, a lot of AD carry champions do have that as well, but she does in particular spike very hard in mid game with her item spikes because she does get her ability evolutions with those as well. And she also does have flexible damage types as well. She has attack damage focus builds, she has ability power focus builds, and you can really mix and match your items how you please in the late game, especially when you are completing your 6-item build. I think that is another reason why she is so cool and why a lot of people are drawn to her as a champion and want to be picking her in multiple different instances because she does have a lot of flexibility in that way. Yeah, I think she can fit a lot of different places, but not nearly as much as she used to. And we're gonna be looking at that here. But she does have some weaknesses, of course. She does have a high skill cap, which if you're watching this video, you probably already know that. you probably have already played her a fair bit, and you already know. She's just one of those champions that does take quite a bit of mastery to really get to the level of competitiveness that you're looking for on a competitive team. But that's usually not a weakness. Usually you do have a bunch of games in her anyway. But her high skill cap does come with her slow early game. She doesn't really have the most powerful early game spikes. As I was mentioning, she doesn't really need her items and her item stats to make sure that her abilities are better. And she also does have short range in the laning phase. She has one of the shortest ranges of any ranged champion in the game. And that does mean that her laning phase is a little bit weaker because of it. You can't just auto trade all the time. You can't just stand further away and hit the minions so you can farm up. It does not work as well for Kai'Sa because her range is shorter than other champions. So that being said, that is why she is a little bit weak in the laning phase, but she does still have some options to help her out there, and other options with supports as well to help her out there. But we're going to look at the builds first here. We've got the Stormrazor Rush. This is one of the most popular Kai'Sa builds over the course of her lifespan as a champion in the game. However, ever since they did nerf it of 5 AD, it's no longer as powerful as it once was. It's been pretty much outdated on the current patch that we are on right now. It's either 10.6, 10.7. This build, you can't really go for it anymore as it stands at the moment, because they did take 5 AD off of it, and while that doesn't affect most champions that were building it before, it does affect Kai'Sa very heavily, because one of the big reasons you did want to go for this item is because it did make sure you got your 2 evolutions much sooner. Your Icathian Rain and your Supercharge do get bonus stats here from this item. Of course, it's one of the few items in the game that does give both attack damage and attack speed, but as it stands, it just does not give enough of both of those stats to warrant a first purchase on Kai'Sa anymore. So don't go this item anymore. As it stands right now, not worthwhile. It is not optimal by any means. We do have a new build being popularized now, though. We have the Essence Reaver rush into the Nashor's Tooth immediately after, and this is a build that has been popularized by a recent Sneaky video and stream. He has been going this build on Kai'Sa, so you still get the attack speed from the BF sword earlier on. This is a build that spikes a lot earlier for Kai'Sa, especially in the laning phase. If you can get the BF sword on your first purchase, it does give you a lot of AD, which helps immensely in the lane for this champion. And it also gives you a lot of cooldown reduction. When you do complete both of these 2 items, you do already have your cooldown reduction cap, which is very handy for a champion like Kai'Sa, especially since they did just buff her W, her Void Seeker, to refund its cost, or not its cost, its cooldown by 70% if you do hit a champion with it. And of course that becomes pretty ludicrous if you do have a lot of points in the ability and a lot of cooldown reduction, which is one of the big reasons why this build is so popular right now. However, does mean that your assassination potential isn't quite as good, because you don't have as much DPS as the next build that I'm going to talk about here, and you don't really fit into the compositions that Kai'Sa really does shine in as much. But we are going to talk about this build a little bit at the end of the video as well, because I do think there is still some validity into going for this. But the real build that I want to talk about, and the real build that I'm going to focus her strengths on throughout the rest of the video until the end, like I mentioned, is the Manamune and Ginsu's Rageblade build. Now, this build is definitely the most flexible of Kai'Sa's builds. You can transition this into a more on-hit build with Nashor's Tooth. You can transition this into a more crit and AD focused build with things like Phantom Dancer, Infinity Edge, that nature. And it also provides you with what I would consider to be the best item on Kai'Sa in the entire game, which is the Ginsu's Rageblade. It is the only item in the game that provides you with all 3 stats that you do need to evolve your abilities: your attack damage, your ability power, and your attack speed. And on top of that, it gives you the on-hit ability, so you can stack your passive better. And on top of that, it gives you armor penetration and magic penetration. So this is just the Exodia item for Kai'Sa, and I think it fits very, very well with the Manamune build as well. Of course, you were usually building this second when you went Stormrazor as well, but now that Manamune has stolen the 5 AD from the Stormrazor, it's just better to go for this build as well. And they did give her 2 more missiles on her Icathian Rain as well. So if you do hit one person with the Q, you're getting even more procs of the Manamune passive on it as well. So I think this 2-item spike is the most powerful in the game for Kai'Sa, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on when I mention her throughout the rest of the video, because it just gives you a ton of different flexibility, a ton of different DPS options, and you can fit in with a lot of the compositions that I'm going to be talking about with her as well for the rest of the video. So with that being said, I think this build is going to be your default one, at least your first 2 items. So be sure to note that when you're putting Kai'Sa into your team. But with that, let's hop into the real meat of this video here, and that is going to be touching on the concept of drafting with Kai'Sa as a competitive team. If you are on a competitive team, or you're trying to get into the scene, you probably already knew a lot of the things that I just mentioned. So we're gonna hop into what you probably came here to talk about, or listen to me talk about. The big thing to note when drafting Kai'Sa onto your team is you have to, of course, know your strengths and weaknesses as the champion. There are more weaknesses than there were before, and that's something that you really do have to keep in mind, as she is more of a niche champion, more of a counter pick type champion here. Of course, this does apply to a lot of the champions in the game. You do need to keep in mind the strengths and weaknesses of any champion that you're drafting onto your team, but is especially true for Kai'Sa now, as she's become a little bit weaker, and she's not a blind pick champion anymore. Blind pick champions are the ones that you don't really have to worry about weaknesses as much because they have so strong strengths, or they're just very flexible in the draft. You can put them in different roles. Kai'Sa, of course, doesn't really have either of those two things, so you do have to keep her in mind there. The big thing about Kai'Sa is she is only really good in the bot lane role as it stands right now, and her unique identity as a champion is that she is not only the assassin type champion, but she is a secondary engage type champion as well. So you really want to be getting into the backline with this champion. It's not the same as other champions of the marksman type, because you are often wanting to just sit back and shoot people from afar. I think like Varus, Caitlyn, you're not really going into the backline with these champions more often than not. But as Kai'Sa, that's how you are getting a lot of your damage out. You are going in with crowd control champions, with diving champions, and finishing people off through that. So you can move around with your stealth and your killer instinct as well. So yeah, Kai'Sa is a very unique champion. She was overtuned before. She's not as much anymore, and you do need to be focusing on that, especially when you are drafting around her. The biggest thing the biggest thing that people draw to and immediately think of when they're drafting with Kai'Sa is, oh, she's in the bot lane. Who am I going to be pairing her with? And that's the first question, of course. It's not the biggest question, I would say, in the grand scheme of things in a competitive team draft, but especially for like solo queue and things of that nature, if you see a Kai'Sa on your team and you're playing support, you wanna know what you can draft with her. And the biggest supports that you are going to want on your team are the ones that have a lot of all-in threat in the lane and a lot of crowd control. Multiple types of crowd control are going to be better for Kai'Sa because you can proc your passive multiple times. Think champions like Alistar, Leona, and Nautilus, who have an ability to go in and then ability to crowd control them in the same spot. So they've already procced Kai'Sa's passive 2 times immediately off the bat. So then Kai'Sa only has to attack 3 times immediately, which is why usually at Kai'Sa you go for Press the Attack or Hail of Blades. It's been more popular recently, so you can just instantly get your passive proc off with these champions, and those are the champions that can really benefit that playstyle here. Of course, it's a very aggressive playstyle. You're going all in a lot of the time, especially with Alistar and Leona. You don't have too many options to back off with these pairings with Kai'Sa, but it does give you a lot of kill threat, which is really nice for Kai'Sa. You can snowball through kill threat, and make sure that your jungler can come down there as well. There of course are other safer options that still have crowd control, but can peel back and help the Kai'Sa survive a little bit more if you are wanting to play to other spots of the map and you're not really playing to bot side. Those champions are going to be things like Thresh, Taric, and Rakan that still have a little bit of crowd control and still have dive threat, most notably Rakan with this one, but you still can peel back, and you're not fully dedicating your entire kit to all in. So these champions can help you scale up into the late game through a little bit more defense as well. But you still have the all-in threat if you are just outplaying your opponents in the bot lane 2v2. Now, the champions that really do not pair well with Kai'Sa at all in the bot lane are going to be the champions that don't have reliable crowd control, don't have all-in threat, and the safety is a little bit lackluster as well. And these are champions that generally want to be scaling up in the lane. There's going to be a lot of enchanters. Sona, Karma, and Yuumi are the examples that I've given here. Their crowd control is very unreliable, or they just don't have any hard crowd control at all until they hit level 6. And yeah, that's not going to be very beneficial to Kai'Sa in the lane because you don't get your passive procs up as easily, and you're not really providing too much to her. So on the scale of things, as you're looking at it here on this visual here, go towards the left part of the screen rather than the right, and you're gonna be helping out your Kai'Sa a whole lot more through that in the lane specifically. But as for the opposition in your bot lane, it's very similar, actually. You don't want your Kai'Sa to be all-in upon, and you don't want your Kai'Sa to be poked out and just dominated in the early game. As Kai'Sa, you do want to be against something that wants to scale pretty parallel with you, so that your Kai'Sa can get to the mid game and shine there, because Kai'Sa spikes very, very hard in the mid game, especially when your comp is built around her doing so. So you do want to be against scaling lanes more often than not that also kind of spike around that time, so that Kai'Sa can really take advantage of that. The main counter pick that Kai'Sa is used into right now is Ezreal, because his lane doesn't really have amazing all-in threat. Of course, you still can, but again, that's more just outplaying rather than champion-specific things. Ezreal also wants to spike in the mid game with his 2 items, but Kai'Sa typically can do that a little bit better than Ezreal. Ezreal does scale better than her eventually because he is just a very powerful champion in the meta right now, but Kai'Sa does still have a lot of power and a lot of all-in threat that can really hinder an Ezreal's game plan. So that's really the main counterpick that you want to be considering when drafting her on the current patch. But there are other champions that you can do the same thing with. There are things like Sivir that don't have an amazing early lane. In the mid game's not amazing either, but Sivir will, again, eventually outscale the Kai'Sa, so you do have to be careful of that. Kai'Sa's really just an all-in mid-game fighting champion. Your late game isn't amazing anymore. There are champions that can outscale you, so you do have to keep that in mind, especially when drafting with Kai'Sa here. Now, the real section of this video that I want to focus on and really nail home here is drafting Kai'Sa with the rest of your team in mind, because you can have a good bot lane 2v2 all you want, but if you don't have the things on the rest of your team that benefit Kai'Sa especially, then your strength as Kai'Sa is going to be completely out the window, because like I mentioned before, you are a mid-game fighting champion. You want to be dueling people in the mid-game. You want to be clumping up and really attacking the backline with this champion. And if you don't have the champions on your team that are good at doing that, then you are not going to be able to effectively pump out damage on Kai'Sa, and you might as well be picking another champion. And the biggest thing to remember as Kai'Sa is that she is a secondary engaged champion. And what I mean by that is you don't want to be the first person going in on a secondary engaged champion. You want to have a primary engage on your team. And specifically when talking about secondary engaged champions, if you don't have a primary engaged champion on your team, then they are much less effective as champions. And some examples of primary engaged champions are going to be things like Jarvan, Ornn, Kled, Malphite. These champions that just have massive go buttons that just signal your team immediately, all right, we are going in. In the instance of Kled and Ornn, it even has a giant sound that you can draw to and be like, okay, my top laner is going in, my mid laner is going in, my jungler is going in. We are starting to fight now. This is the kind of thing that is very beneficial for Kai'Sa and other secondary engaged champions. Yeah, some other examples of secondary engaged. The biggest one, in my opinion, is Galio. He doesn't have an ultimate ability that he can really use to get in without another champion that he can jump to. Things like the Jarvan especially are paired with him a lot of the time, or Camille as well. Galio is the signature secondary engage, or at least his ultimate is, because then you can drop down and get your knock up and your ultimate and your magic damage shield as it is now down onto your team. Yasuo is another great example, especially with Gragas. You drop the Gragas cask in, and then Yasuo can go in. Kai'Sa is on that side of things, because with her Killer Instinct and her passive as well, getting your Caustic Wounds down, you want your champions on your team to be able to go in first, so then you can take advantage of the Killer Instinct, of the Caustic Wounds, and get in the back line and start DPSing through that. So while a lot of other marksmen do want to be in the back line and play front to back, Kai'Sa is much the opposite. You want to be going into the back, and so you want to have a primary engaged champion with a lot of crowd control on your team to really take benefit and take heed of Kai'Sa's strengths on your team. And that's really what it comes down to when you are putting Kai'Sa on your team. If you don't have something like that, then Kai'Sa becomes much less effective, and you are kind of drafting yourself into a hole, because it's so difficult as Kai'Sa to really get in range of the enemy team and deal damage and get all of your Caustic Wounds stacks off if you don't have a front line that is engaging for you and engaging with you, especially with Kai'Sa, to really enable you to get into the back line and deal this damage. So that's why a lot of the time in solo queue, Kai'Sa's win rate is significantly lower than it would seem in professional play and things like that, because Kai'Sa actually is very team reliant in that she doesn't need these specific champions on her team to really pump out the damage and really become this powerhouse that we know that Kai'Sa can be. We know, we've seen the montages, and she does have the Invictus Gaming skin as well. So we've seen JackeyLove do this. Um, we as Kai'Sa, you do need these champions on your team to really benefit from this. So that is the biggest thing to keep in mind when you are drafting a Kai'Sa on your team. Um, you need to have that. If you're not, then you might as well be drafting another champion on your team. But with that being said, I do want to shed some light on the previous build that I mentioned before, the Essence Reaver Nashor's Tooth into ability power focus build. You can have this as a backup plan. If you don't have the best engage on your team and you still want to be pumping out damage as Kai'Sa, you can sort of become an artillery mage with your W, with the cooldown reduction and the ability power in this build. You can have that as an option. Like I mentioned before, it is not optimal at all. You do want to be a secondary engaged champion, because this build is not that. You don't have the DPS to really execute people on that. You are just focusing on firing out your Void Seekers and trying to be an effective champion through that, and just being a poke champion. I think this build has some validity to it. Like I mentioned before, it's pretty good in solo queue, and I think it can translate pretty all right to a competitive setting as well. But the big thing to keep in mind when doing this is why not just put an Ezreal on your team? Ezreal will do this much better than Kai'Sa. He has much better poke, and his kiting is better too. And he doesn't have a useless ultimate in that way. Of course, it's not a useless ultimate. You do still have the shield, and you can still maybe use it to get into the back line, but you might as well just be picking Ezreal, because then you have 4 poking abilities rather than just 1. So be sure to keep that in mind. If you like this style of Kai'Sa and you want to implement it on your team, probably look at Ezreal instead, because that champion is very good right now, and he does a very similar thing to what this build is trying to accomplish. But with that, that's about it. That's about all I would like to talk about here with Kai'Sa today. I believe it is a little bit of a shorter video than it was before, than the previous video of split pushing, but I'm hoping that this helps you and other people as well. Look at how you're wanting to put Kai'Sa on your team, because like I said before, she is not a blind pickable champion. You do need to have a few stars aligning for her to be very, very effective on your team, but she does still have those very high highs where this champion can be very, very good and the exact champion that you need on your team, but you do especially need to have that primary engage on your team. Speaking of primary engage, I am looking at making the primary engage, secondary engage type champions a topic of my next video. So be sure to look out for that. That's going to be out sometime this week. I'm gonna make a very similar video to this and release it sometime this week. So be looking out for that. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you have suggestions for other kinds of videos of this nature directed towards competitive teams, then feel free to let me know. Or if you have other things that you think I missed about the Kai'Sa topics here, drop a comment there as well. I really do appreciate your feedback in that way. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel. Like I mentioned, I will be making more videos of this nature, and specifically the Engage type champions one will be out later this week. So if you want to know exactly when that one is released, be sure to drop a subscribe and hit the bell as well. Yeah, thanks again so much for watching. I have been Smex. Thank you for checking out my channel, and I will see you all next time. Catch you later.